Broken Thing, Chapter 6. Gagarin had known that immediately upon leaving the tower he would be under constant surveillance from that point forward. The delicate shell game of being both Thane Krios and Gagarin Itran had been, and potentially would still be, a painful and time-consuming process of painstaking DNA implants, cosmetic and medical interventions. If he were granted liberty, he could employ body doubles, but that was a lower priority than execution of mission. If he were to be permanently Gagarin from this point forward, with no opportunity to temporarily revert to Krios, he was prepared. The estate was prepared. All things in place for that contingency. She was prepared. At the moment, he was in a medical state of recovery and potential chaos if immunosuppressant therapy went badly. Krios' immune system had been eradicated, and his bone marrow had been replaced with the marrow of Itran on an accelerated schedule, risking toxic shock and rejection. These and other complications were still concerns. He had recovered enough to be encouraged that the medications would work to adjust to his new immune system. Drell were compatible with each other in metabolism and composition much more than many other species, making this transformation possible and a secret of the Hanar's compact. Itran's body was in cryo-suspension, and there was an abundance of banked genetic material that had been extracted to establish and maintain the Krios identity. He did not trust surgeons. He remained conscious during all procedures, and educational practice as he was to be a doctor. All excruciating, but necessary. He would only permit local anesthesia, and even then that was limited. No mind-altering or paralytic potential. He provided the medical agents and components, he supervised. Studying medicine had been effective in helping him select procedures for his transformation that he had always undergone with a handler supervising. Itran had an active prescription license which would be useful in the future, potentially. He arranged for theft and purchase of agents and independent testing before use. The surgeons were all threatened effectively, but it was never wise to be at anyone's mercy, particularly people who had reasons to kill him due to those threats. They were all dead now. It would not do to be recognized at any point in the future as a suspicious and threatening green Drell who had transformed to a blue and red Drell that resembled one on Commander Shepard's squad. Itran's coloring, contour, and markings were now permanent. Only a deep biopsy of tissue would reveal a differential in DNA, and then only for a diminishing window in time, possibly 1 more month, if someone were to acquire lung or heart tissue and test it. Injury and rejection were still high risks, but must be taken, as Krios, being absent from the estate for months at a time, would be suspicious, and it had been necessary to function as both entities to prepare for the future and rearrange the past to his liking. He had retroactively hacked and replaced Itran's identifiers to conform to his current body scan, arranged and studied his digital life and real life, and had passed as Itran for the previous months selectively. He had created the potential trail of evidence for his double life as a doctor who arranged for slaves to be freed or purchased selectively. He could not afford to waste time. If Vakarian attempted to detain Krios before retrieving Cara, Krios would be gone. Suspicion would be transferred to someone in Vakarian's office, informing Krios of investigation. Evidence of such had been created and could be released as necessary. Itran could trigger a crash of the estate systems and security remotely at any point, and an outside source attempting to break in would result in the same, making tracking and investigation difficult and reliant upon physical evidence and testimony. There were many ways on Beckenstein that Krios could access the estate without using any known transport method that could be monitored by law enforcement. Authorized vehicles could enter the system, law enforcement could not. Krios' biometrics, appearance, and DNA profile could be reproduced with approximately 12 hours of preparation. The most common samples for testing were saliva, epidermis, blood, or venom for Drell, and from this point forward they would all hold true to the Itran identity. He must now rely on prosthetics and cosmetics with samples of Krios' DNA and biometrics to access the estate. As he set and supervised those settings, it would not be an insurmountable obstacle to alter or override them as he chose, but he preferred rising to the challenge of authenticity rather than hacking. Authenticity took commitment, and although he was exhausted and in pain, authenticity would ensure that he might someday be in the position he wished to be. Therefore, it was worth the effort. Casual contact with anything, as he was now, would read genetically Itran, but he was not expecting the counselor to stick to casual. Vakarian had been canny and reactive to the situation, and not suspicious of Kegirin outwardly, but Kegirin expected to be under surveillance constantly from the moment of entering the tower. Providing the cover of lunch, having the transmitters, and the added touch of having a safe house provided was reassuring that he was in fact dealing with an intelligent, if potentially honest man, who was only devious up to a certain point. Cara's assessment of him would hopefully hold true, and Vakarian would provide the necessary civility and trust required to proceed on the fastest and safest route for her rescue. Delay would be unfortunate for the counselor. Now Kegarin was under the counselor's control and surveillance and needed to do what the counselor planned, hopefully having impressed upon Vakarian that his cooperation was key and the situation delicate. It was encouraging that he had been given the transmitters, but that could of course be a feint. If Vakarian chose to blindly assault the estate with only the information he had so far, Cara would still be safe. She would not be happy, because staff would not be safe, and ideally she wished to escape with only the risks absorbed by the two of them. She had kept her bargain with him. She had not tried to escape. Kegarin would preserve the lives of staff at her request as her due. If Vakarian did not follow his guidelines, then likely staff would die, and she would know loss of life resulted from Vakarian's judgment call. She would side with Kegarin's plan as the safer course should Vakarian bypass his recommendations. Kegarin would not mind meditating for a few days or weeks until Cara came to find him and ask about his welfare, but they had gone to so much trouble. He would also like to thread the needle of his own security with her. It would be a treasured memory for both of them, much more suitable than meeting her at the door of his holding cell. It would be more difficult to present Itran as a potential squad mate if his only role in her rescue was to deliver blood, but they would overcome that obstacle if necessary. She would have an inspiration to include Kegarin in her life. That was the moment where Vakarian would become the most suspicious. Beyond that, when they became lovers, he would move beyond suspicion to accusation. Vakarian might possibly accept temporarily and superficially that she did not wish to be touched. She would declare continued love for Vakarian until her death. They must not allow Vakarian to separate them. The role of preventing that belonged solely to Cara. If necessary, she would fight for Kegarin under all circumstances. If Vakarian forced her to fight him, so be it. It was acceptable, and even preferable, that Vakarian was ultimately suspicious of the Drell in her life. It would never be acceptable that he had proof at any stage. He wished to return to Cara once more as Krios, but that may not be possible with potential surveillance, or if Vakarian did not ask him to go about his business and be in touch as a plan was constructed. Ideally, Itran should be off the Citadel and able to shake surveillance at several points, substituting a body double under compulsion. It would be better if Krios returned to the estate and then left again for the story's sake, but that may not be possible. Krios in many ways no longer functionally existed, and visiting her was unsatisfying in some ways. Sexual liberty, to which he was accustomed with her, was now problematic. Upon her rescue, it was likely she would undergo extraordinary medical evaluation, and discovering the DNA of Kegerin Itran in her body would ruin all their work. She had undergone a transformation of personality as part of his preparation. Krios and Dralafa barely existed in their original forms, intentionally obliterated and only produced with great effort, with little to recommend them in terms of created memory. To attempt to evoke them would be counterproductive. Krios had already bid goodbye to her. She would not remember. He would. At the moment, Vakarian was likely reviewing Itran's life story. In the future, Vakarian would have reasons to become suspicious, confused, enraged, and likely irretrievably paranoid to observers. Krios had promised her he would save the lives of staff, not necessarily their sanity. He had promised to save Vakarian's life, not necessarily his sanity. She had insisted upon the use of venom. He obliged her in his own way as to the method and motive of kissing frogs. It was possible many people would be driven to suicide or flight on the basis of relative truths shifting through different perspectives. Thane Krios had a life of his own, regardless of his physical presence. His reach and influence could still be felt if necessary. Sparing their lives was up to her. Sparing their minds was up to him, and to their past and future behavior. She could not have it all her way with the prices she demanded of him. She would pay as well, but others would pay if he were inconvenienced and impeded in accomplishing his goals. Some were chosen to pay regardless of future circumstances based on their past choices. Unfortunately for Vakarian, the more clever and persistent he was, the more difficult it would be to maintain any standard of sanity. If he were very clever, he might uncover the suspicion that Kegerin Itran was, in fact, Thane Krios, while being unable to prove it, unable to speak to or convince Cara. He would hold the counselorship without doubt, as that was the only way he had any control over contacting her. He was an excellent counselor. The war would be best served by his remaining in place. But Kegerin was unconvinced that he was irreplaceable. Vakarian, experiencing the permanent loss of potential bond and suspicion of continued captivity of his bondmate without the authority or capacity to prove it or rescue her, might take hold of his psyche if he were not extraordinarily careful. If he lost the counselorship, it was unfortunate but not catastrophic. Kegerin's faith was in Cara, not in Vakarian, and she had functioned without council support or even with council impedance. With Itran at her side, they would do what must be done. Knowing that much of Vakarian's success was due to Cara's hacking ability at the outset of his rise to power, and to Tassoni's maintenance of intel, that route could be used to bolster or manipulate any Turian replacement to the office. Cara would advise Vakarian to not look for Krios. Vakarian, in all likelihood, would not oblige her, unfortunate in a Turian who had claimed he would follow her commands and honor her as his Ava. Predictable and exploitable for Kegerin's needs. It would all be self-inflicted if Vakarian did not do as she asked and drop the search. Her will should be paramount. Vakarian had pledged so. Would he have the integrity to keep to his word, a bond he had chosen, if she chose differently? Cara would have integrity. Itran believed Vakarian would not choose the path of integrity and obedience. They would see what came of it. Call it the price exacted for bonding to her without her consent, and failing to protect her after making that choice. Unforgivably arrogant. The punishment of biology alone was insufficient to that crime. Anguish had been caused. Anguish would be exacted. She would not suffer alone, and she would not know she was suffering. Gagarin and Cara had needed to predict the worst case and the best case scenarios and strategies to adapt to all approaches from an ideal set starting point. He had needed to think like a counselor with a bond and a motive for heroic recovery on his own terms. If Gagarin were in the counselor's place and making his choices for him, Gagarin would be under polite house arrest and then would be interrogated and placed in protective custody with an identification change imminent. If the interrogation yielded anything suspicious, it would be less in the way of protective custody and more in the way of permanent imprisonment, leading to torture and execution once the man's life story had been extracted, verified, and analyzed. Gagarin could adapt to that, and it would be restful in comparison to the last few months, if disappointing for the future narrative he was attempting to build. One of the concerns was being able to pick up communication with her beyond Vicarian's utilization of Gagarin's expertise, which had been necessarily downplayed to give no sense of inside job. She had no omnitool, no contact frequencies, those must be provided. Gagarin obviously could not keep his omnitool frequencies after escape if he wished to evade Krios, and therefore it would be difficult to locate one another. Depending on how long they were both detained, he for protection and questioning, and her for recovery, it might be a very long time before he saw the outside of this room or any other restrictive locale. If Vicarian did as he had done with her before, locked her in the tower with only him as her company, that would not go well for him. If Vicarian placed Gagarin under protective custody and would not tell Cara where he was, they would have to be creative. They must take certain risks. They were unavoidable, the same way his physical transformation created physical vulnerabilities that must be overcome. He was assured of their creative capacity and that Cara would be convincing. Surveillance of Gagarin would be appropriately boring. They would observe meditation and sleep. A great deal of sleep would be required for medical recovery. He had rarely slept in the past months. He had a store of immune suppressants and mild pain control. All he would risk. Again, nothing that would impact concentration and strategic maneuverability. Sleep would be welcome, if permitted. For the moment, in his new home, he chose to give the appearance of restless exhaustion, the image of a man who had made a difficult choice and faced the potential gallows in the near future. A man whose conscience had weighed upon him. A man who had found his courage wanting and wished to gather more. Upon reflection, he chose to relive his last night with her as Krios, with her as his whole woman, and then his transformed Dralafa. He would miss those women, grieved, as though a favorite song would never be sung. He was consoled that he was able to choose to create chords of her, harmonious and without a ripple of her inherent dissonance. But he would miss her dissonance. He would remember all her tones, all her music. Her dissonance would find outlet and he would see it, not directed at him, but outward toward the greater threat. He sat on the bed, center, posed, hands with palms up, one cradled upon the other, the symbolic state of mind and hands open to the inspiration of the gods. He found his inspiration.
He moves behind the woman with no name as she is. She is not Cara. She is not Lal. She is not Dralafa. She is all of them, and None of them, those women, all dressed in drill fabric. His lies, she makes truth. She has made many of his choices hers, adopted, like starving animals, sent after her in hunger. They, like he, unable in some ways to bite as intended, now loyal to her. She is in black, his favorite color against her pale skin, contrast and texture and the soft flutter of grace in the movement of her limbs. She no longer pulls at the fabric, but always finds herself perfect in her setting, skin, and shade. He anticipates the temperature of each revealed point, crest, swell of her skin, tactile memory and prediction of what he will find when he touches her. Soft hair at the back of her neck, warmer under the fall of dark strands, the cooler curve of her waist, the warmer air under the curve of her breasts. She stands before the mirror where he first saw his whole woman. He must say goodbye to her soon, perhaps now, in the place where she first woke, where he first saw vibrant violet eyes. He chooses now. Now is a gift and privilege he must soon defer, at best, to gain it in altered form in the distant future. At worst, to lose her. To experience now with all of her would not be a choice he could make. Perhaps never again. She would try to kill him. He would rather she killed him than to risk hurting her physically. If he had his voice, he could always subdue her and begin again. He would always have his voice. Perhaps someday she overcomes the challenge of reapers and his whim of ownership weakens, and he sets her free. He imagines she has her own fear of weakness, the fear that someday she might look at him and choose to stand at his side whole because it is what she wishes to do. For either of them, these are not fears that will likely come to pass. She loves him, but only because she knows him, and she is composed of love. She cannot hate him any more than he can love her, but they can come close to those states. They can both be tempted. She might hesitate in killing him. He might hesitate in subduing her because he wishes to see twin sons in full wrath, to bring that out in her, to grant her the moment of seeing him, to see her again, whole. The potential would always be there, whatever her name. He steps behind her, one hand around her throat, another sliding under fluttering black around her waist. She has venom, but it is fading. She has bathed and dressed, a matter of lingering hours. He has addressed business while she enjoyed a long bath, one with bubbles, one of her small whimsies clad in Venice fruit. He did not join her and did not watch. He can watch later if he chooses. Surveillance is ever present until he erases it all, after it is unnecessary because he holds it in his mind. His mouth at the back of her neck sends tremors through her body, the treasured flush to her skin, and rising of her hair making textured memory under his fingertips. He closes his eyes, mourning the end of liberties such as this, his hands and body able to capture hers whenever he wishes. It is necessary and unfortunate, and his liberty is a fading thing, turning to vapor as new plans become more solid. Krios will be gone. Beyond this point, his color will change, his DNA will alter, the insides of his bones and blood filling with something new. Someone who looks different, but would be the same. He asks her, I once gave you 10 minutes to try to kill me. Do you wish to try now?
No.
Do you wish to succeed in killing me?
Yes.
I have not told you enough that I appreciate your wisdom and your honesty. You are human and will perhaps forget. Thane Krios will be gone soon. Will you miss him? She hesitates, the words wisdom and honesty no doubt wreathed in challenge in her mind.
Yes.
One of his hands plays flat on her stomach, and he pulls her back against his body, his cock hard against her upper back as though her spine were a grooved channel built to hold him in place against her. Memories of nights spent with her pulled back against him, venom along her skin, with him an inescapable fact of her life. I know you won't hear it. You won't listen. But I have to say it. I have to try, at least. You don't have to do this. I know. I choose to do this. We choose to do this. I did not choose. You chose to live. You chose to fight. It is the same for me. In that, if in nothing else, we are in accord. You want me to argue with the nothing else, don't you? Of course. I enjoy arguing with you. I am going to miss it. I'm not going to give you the "you can be a good guy" speech. It's wasted on you. And I am not going to attempt to convince you that what I am doing is for anything other than... He stops speaking, unable to define what it is, and his eyes meet hers. She looks at him, and it is with near pity. Sanar, you can't be a good guy. You can be an extraordinary man. You can make different choices. I don't have to kill you. You can turn yourself in. His smile is gentle. Would you visit me? Her eyes change from pity to the communion, the resolution she is capable of, somehow turning his dissonance into a symphony with her added notes. Yes. Even with that, I find my course set, but I thank you for your words. None of your words are wasted. I will remember them. Walk away. Don't touch me. Don't do this. Tears crest in her eyes. You could have been an extraordinary man. You could still be an extraordinary man. Don't destroy. She means it. She means every word, and it is from her heart. It is not said against her will. It is not said because she wants him to die. She wants him to live and be an extraordinary man, as she is an extraordinary woman. She sees potential, but she cannot see her way clear to him, ever reaching for it. and neither can he. It is not your fault, Cara, who I am. I have made my choices. You cannot change them. What they did to you, what you're doing to me, it could end. I know, and I will work to prevent that. Her eyes do not close, and her love does not fade. She knew the answer before she began. It is as she says. She must say it for herself. She turns in his arms, and her lips reach for his willingly. A hunger of her own, her last opportunity to speak to him, touch him, possibly inspire him. She's grace, not in defeat, but in hope. She will fight every moment of her life for her mind, for her future, and she is not afraid for herself. She knows he will watch over her. Between them, they will fight together. They will win. She knows she will not remember, and it does not matter if he remembers. This is something she must do. She must forgive. She must be who she is. She must be wise and tell the truth. Make her judgment. She must move on from who he could have been, his potential that haunts and holds her. She must move on from who she could have been, a woman who had died and been reborn, had been killed and would be reborn, starting a new life and doing what was best as he continued his old one, and his bones and blood filled with the old, the unchanging, and the thing she pities, but would never hate. To her, he is a broken animal, and he does not disagree. If she could, in this moment she would end what she sees as his suffering, and she is bereft, that she must leave him in pain because she has a greater calling and cannot spare him mercy. This is her apology. This is her counting his suffering less than the galaxy's survival. She will use him as he uses her. They will force it to be so. She will rule him as he rules her, and that is what she knows in this moment. Her pain, her suffering in comparison counted as nothing, as it always was and always would be. This moment is about what was done to him, about what she cannot do for him. She is visiting his grave. The small stone of a 6-year-old boy, given and taken and used. That is who she touches. The extraordinary man he might have become had he, like her, risen above. No way of knowing if he ever could have risen above. But in this moment, his suffering is inevitable, something destined, not something in her own path she could overcome for him, or with him. She mourns. The only way he can have her is to sink below, but he will take her gift, as he has taken and will take everything of value to her and make it his, the way she has taken everything of value to him and made it hers. He had been several extraordinary men, but None of that matters, if it was done without her seeing. She is his choice. She is grace, but of a different sort than required at other times. She is solemn, tears down her face and against his scale, her mouth on his, her hands on his face until he lifts her and raises her body to his, her head above his, so she bows her head down to kiss him. Her last conscious, whole act will be to give, to understand, to absolve, to condemn, to destroy, to end. On the scale of depravity, beyond this point of preparation to execution, what he has done, what he plans to do is beyond forgiveness. And she has passed beyond her ability to save him by killing him, save him by turning him toward true light, and not only toward her eyes. He does not wish to be saved. He wishes her lips, and she grants them solemnity and the gravity of twin suns, unable to see that it is her that has done this thing to them both. Or perhaps she does understand somehow in her wisdom and tears, responsible and grieving. She is the grace of passing beyond grief into final judgment, acceptance of unbearable loss without potential recovery. Possession of her shadow is all he would ever have, and it would be enough for him, like the hungry animals that come to bite and stay because the world outside her door is a bitter place once her threshold has been crossed. He murmurs against her lips, "It is the will of the sand, Cara." A drill prayer. Surrender to fate, surrender to gods. The myriad choices of the gods distilled into mystic sand, shifting and willful, patient and cruel, unending, uncaring of thirst or hunger or hope. She answered his ritual call in response of surrender and of struggle. My will joins the sand and the path, Senna. They were as they were. The sand would work its will, and so would he. And so would she. Her hands move on his clothes. Now she was Cara, and nobody else. She was not Shepard, and she was not his Dralafa. She was a young girl who had witnessed murder and loss, a young girl who was now a woman of her own shape and sculpture, unaffected by his influence for this free moment that was her last. His last. What he has done to her is stripped away through the miracle of honest hands and generous heart, lips and tears and fingers that have learned everything there is to know of him of importance. The image in the mirror is not him with his hand at her throat, but of her facing him, with her hands on him, as he wished, but not as he wished, as he desired, but more than he could bear. She is small and clad in black wisps, blue biotics flaring on his skin as blood rose to the surface of hers. Her blood had always been her blood, her bone, her marrow, and His entire body and mind had passed in ownership and identity so often that now the only meaning he had is that his blood, his bone, and his marrow were hers. His eyes in the mirror are changed. Hers are the same. His body under the now false green is blue and red, the violet in her eyes made true and owned by her, the lie of Krios soon to be shed like a skin, so he could stalk her in camouflage. The violet of Itran, a serendipitous gift of the sand that his false skin matched her now true eyes. Her clothes are nothing, no barrier to entry or contact. His arms around her body as her mouth covers his, her hand frees his cock, and then she is against the mirror, her hand guiding him inside, and now the truth will end. Venom will take her, and he will never see her again. But he will remember her. He tastes her mouth, tastes her skin, his arms crackling with pain and passion, weary and resolved, and she is all things, death and life, choice and servitude, hope and dread. She has taken him, learned him, surpassed him, this small fey creature with her head against the glass, neck arched as an invitation to kiss, to bite, and he must. For a strained and choking moment he wishes to pull from her body before venom takes hold, to keep her here, the woman who understands the mirror and why it matters. The straining and choking does not end, but his body is the sand. She is the path, and he will not stop. He will never stop. He will not hesitate. He has lost her, but will gain another her. As many hers as he can find, as many hers as she can produce, if she sees him as she does now. She is moaning. Her dark and husky sounds he will always find in her, because her body is a simpler thing than her soul, and he will always have her body. He will never have her whole, but he will have every unshrouded piece he can claim. She passes from Cara to her without a name. Venom now making Krios the past, and Itran her future. With her receptive in joy and pleasure, she is transformed, made of welcome, coming for him in tight wails, and clenches as he murmurs to her of sand and fate and devotion, strokes her body and bites and licks at her until she is clinging and weak, his seed down her thigh, the constant thing that will tie her under any name, to him of any name. He kisses her, and she is made of moans and welcome. Reduced or exalted, he can never tell. Ignorant and knowing as he shakes, and biotics crawl out of him to reach her. He whispers his other call in response. Words of meaning, words of prayer. She is mine. She is yours. Spend the day in bed with me. I must leave you soon, and I will miss you. He does not Give her a name. Yes.